What if every small act of kindness you performed was being cataloged, measured, and judged by someone you'd never suspect? What if the invisible people in your life, the ones society taught you to overlook, held the keys to everything you'd ever dreamed of? For Madison Cole, the answer arrived on a rain-soaked morning in March, 8 months after she'd started noticing a ghost. Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood wore rain like a second skin. Inside Rosie's diner, the fluorescent lights hummed their tired song, casting everything in a yellowish glow that made fresh food look 3 days old. The air hung thick with burnt coffee and fryer grease, a smell Madison had long stopped noticing. It clung to her uniform, her hair, her skin, the smell of survival. 26 years old with a nursing degree she'd abandoned halfway through, Madison was drowning in debt that multiplied faster than she could count it. Student loans, medical bills from her mother's last hospital stay, credit cards she'd maxed just to keep the lights on, and now another eviction notice taped to her apartment door. $847 by Friday, or her belongings would meet the curb. 3 constants defined her existence: worn sneakers with holes in both soles, a bank account that laughed at the word savings, and table 7. Every morning at exactly 6:47 a.m., the old man shuffled through the door. Not 6:45, not 6:50, always 6:47. He moved like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible, shoulders hunched forward, head slightly bowed. His coat, a faded gray wool thing that must have been expensive once, maybe 30 years ago, hung off his thin frame like it was ashamed of what it had become. The fabric was worn through at the elbows, stained with age and weather. His shoes told an even sadder story. Brown leather Oxfords held together with silver duct tape wrapped around the soles, the kind of desperate repair that screamed, "I can't afford new ones." His hands trembled when he reached for things. Not the shake of disease, but something else. Exhaustion, maybe, or a hunger that had gone on too long. The other servers called him the Ghost. Sandra, the morning shift supervisor, used the nickname without cruelty, just fact. "The Ghost is here," she'd announced to no one in particular when the door chimed at 6:47. Marcus, the line cook, was less kind. "Why waste your time on the Ghost? Dude probably hasn't tipped more than quarters in his whole life." But Madison saw what they didn't. Or maybe she chose to see what they decided to ignore. The old man's order never changed. Black coffee, 2 sugars, no cream. 1 slice of wheat toast, cut diagonally, not straight across, which mattered for reasons she couldn't explain, with butter served on the side in a small ramekin, not spread. He'd carry his plate to the corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that nobody else wanted, and sit facing the Rain Street window. For exactly 42 minutes, he'd sip his coffee and stare at the bus stop across the street, watching people rush past with their umbrellas and briefcases and lives that were going somewhere. Then he'd leave, counting out exact change from a worn leather coin purse, and disappear into the rain. The first week, Madison tried basic courtesy. "Good morning," she'd said, setting down his coffee with a smile. Nothing, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Just those pale blue eyes staring past her like she was made of air. Week 2, she tried again, and again. The silence felt deliberate, almost aggressive in its completeness. By week 3, she'd accepted the terms. He didn't want conversation. Fine. But that didn't mean she couldn't pay attention. She noticed he always chose the same seat, always faced the same direction. His hands shook worse on Wednesdays. On Fridays, he seemed to sit up straighter, like the weekend ahead carried some private promise. Month 1 brought the first crack in the wall. It was a Thursday morning in October, and the rain had turned vicious. Madison watched him shuffle in, his coat soaked through, water dripping onto the floor with each step. He left wet footprints to table 7, and when he sat down, she could see him shivering. Without asking, without announcing, Madison grabbed the small space heater they kept in the storage closet for when the ancient HVAC system gave up. She plugged it in near his booth, angled so the warmth would reach him without being obvious about it. The old man stared at the heater, then at her, then back at the heater. The next morning, when she set down his coffee, he spoke. His voice came out rough and unused, like machinery that had been sitting idle too long. "Thank you." 2 words, but they landed in Madison's chest like something precious. After that, The ritual evolved. She learned that he preferred his toast warm but not hot. So she timed it perfectly. She noticed he drank his coffee slowly, making it last a full 42 minutes. So she started bringing refills without being asked. On Wednesdays, when his hand shook worse, she'd set the cup down closer to his reach, steady it just slightly before letting go. The other servers thought she'd lost her mind. "You're wasting your time on the ghost," Sandra said one morning, watching Madison carefully position the butter ramekin. "He tips in pocket change. Sometimes not at all." "He's a person," Madison replied quietly. "That's enough." Marcus snorted from a grill. "A person who smells like he hasn't seen a shower in weeks. You got a savior complex or something." But Madison didn't stop. Couldn't stop. These 7 minutes, from the door chime at 6:47 to the moment he shuffled back out into the rain, had become something she couldn't name. Not friendship, not charity. Something simpler and more complicated at once. Month 4, she started talking to fill the silence. Not questions, because he never answered questions. Just observations. Small pieces of her life offered like breadcrumbs. "My landlord's threatening eviction again," she said one morning, wiping down the booth next to his. 3 weeks behind on rent. But I've got a double shift at the hospital cafeteria tonight, so maybe I can catch up. She paused, straightening the napkin dispenser. "My mom wanted me to be a nurse. I wanted that too. Spent 2 years in nursing school before the money ran out. But you know what? This job matters. People need to eat. They need a warm place to sit. That counts for something." The old man said nothing, but his fingers, wrapped around the coffee cup, tightened just slightly. "Sometimes I dream about opening a community health clinic," she continued another morning. "Nothing fancy. Just a place where people without insurance could see a doctor, get their prescriptions filled. Maybe a scholarship program for nursing students who can't afford to finish." She laughed softly. Pipe dreams cost the same as realistic ones. Nothing. So why not dream big? December brought the flannel shirt moment. The morning was bitter, sleet instead of rain, and the old man's coat had finally given up. Madison could see the seams splitting, fabric pulling apart at the shoulders. He sat shivering despite the space heater. She disappeared into the back room and returned with a heavy flannel shirt, blue and gray plaid, thick enough to block wind. Her ex-boyfriend's, left behind when he'd moved to Portland with the woman from his gym. "Here," Madison said, setting it next to his plate. "Just taking up space in my locker." The old man stared at the shirt for a long moment. Then, with movements slow and careful, he pulled it on over his threadbare sweater. It hung large on his thin frame, but it was warm. "Thank you, Madison," he said quietly. She froze. "You know my name?" His lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "It's on your name tag. You've never said it before." I was waiting for the right time. After that, their silence felt different. Companionable instead of empty. He still didn't talk much, but he listened. Madison found herself sharing dreams she hadn't voiced in years. The clinic, the scholarships. The difference she'd wanted to make before life had beaten those hopes into something smaller and more practical. "Sounds expensive," the old man observed one morning. "Most good things are," Madison replied. "Doesn't mean they're not worth wanting." For Madison, these 7 minutes became the only part of her day that felt clean. Outside Rosie's diner, her life was an exhausting series of calculations. Which bill to pay first? Whether she could skip lunch to save $5. How to explain to her landlord that she'd have the rent next week, she promised. Just please don't file the eviction papers yet. Her phone buzzed constantly with collection agencies. Her bank account hovered in the red. Her mother's voice on their weekly calls carried that careful tone people used when they were worried, but trying not to show it. But from 6:47 to 7:29 a.m., none of that mattered. The old man didn't know about her debt, didn't care about her failed degree, or her broken-down car, or her second-hand uniform with someone else's name tag holes still visible on the fabric. He showed up, sat down, and let her be kind to him. And somehow that exchange, toast cut diagonally, butter on the side, a space heater positioned just so, felt more valuable than anything else in her life. Madison couldn't explain it to Sandra or Marcus. They saw a weird old man who smelled like must and sadness. They saw wasted effort, pointless kindness, time that could be spent on customers who actually tipped. But Madison saw something else. She saw someone who'd been invisible so long they'd stopped expecting to be seen. And she saw herself, or the version of herself she was terrified of becoming. One bad month away from that same invisibility. One eviction away from that same shuffle. So she kept showing up, kept cutting the toast diagonally, kept refilling his coffee, kept talking to fill the silence. Because if she stopped seeing him, stopped noticing him, then maybe the world would be justified in stopping its notice of her too. And that thought, the idea of becoming a ghost herself, was more terrifying than any eviction notice. March 15th arrived cold and gray. Madison clocked in at 6:30 a.m., tied her apron, checked table 7, wiped clean, silverware positioned, coffee cup waiting upside down on a saucer. Ready. 6:47 came and went. The door stayed closed. Table 7 stayed empty. At first, Madison told herself he was just running late. Traffic maybe. Or the bus was delayed. At 7 o'clock, she started glancing at the door between every order. At 7:15, anxiety twisted into something harder to ignore. Maybe the ghost finally found a better diner, Sanders said, not unkindly, just matter of fact. But Madison knew better. 8 months. Never once had he missed a morning. Not during the November floods when half the city stayed home. Not during that ice storm in January when the buses stopped running and people were literally slipping on sidewalks. Every single morning, 6:47 a.m., he'd been there. At 7:29, the exact minute he usually left, Madison found herself staring at the empty booth with a feeling she couldn't name. Loss maybe, or dread. Something was wrong. She knew it the way you know stories ending before the final page. The kind of knowing that sits in your stomach like a stone. At 7:30 a.m., the door chimed. Madison's head snapped up, hope surging. But it wasn't the old man, for men stepped inside, and the entire diner seemed to inhale and hold its breath. They weren't just large. They were precisely large, like they'd been selected for uniformity and intimidation in equal measure. Dark suits that moved with them like second skins. Shoulders broad enough to block doorways. Sunglasses despite the gray Seattle morning. They moved with military precision, 2 peeling left, 2 peeling right, scanning the room with the cold efficiency of Secret Service agents securing a perimeter. The breakfast crowd fell silent mid-bite. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Even the hiss and sizzle from Marcus's grill seemed to quiet, as if the building itself sensed something monumental entering its base. Behind the 4 security personnel, a 5th man stepped through the door. Silver hair swept back from a face that radiated expensive living and even more expensive legal victories. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so precisely it looked painted on. Every line calculated to communicate power and permanence. Gold cufflinks caught the fluorescent light. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, probably cost more than Madison's car was worth. He carried a leather briefcase that screamed your problems are now legal problems in a language everyone understood. The man's eyes swept the diner once. Past Sander frozen at the register. Past Marcus visible through the kitchen window. Past the elderly couple in booth 3 and the construction workers at the counter. His gaze moved with surgical precision, dismissing each person in turn until it locked on Madison. Then he walked directly toward her. His shoes clicked against the worn linoleum like a countdown. Each step measured and deliberate. The 4 security men remained by the door, hands clasped in front of them, blocking any exit. The entire restaurant watched this procession with a fascinated horror of people witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Madison's hands, holding a coffee pot she'd forgotten she was carrying, started to shake. The man stopped 3 feet from her. Up close, she could smell his cologne, subtle and obscenely expensive, the kind that probably came in bottles with French names she couldn't pronounce. He was maybe 60, with eyes the color of steel and just as warm. "Are you Madison Elizabeth Cole?" His voice was clipped professional, brooking no nonsense or evasion. Madison's mouth went dry. Her full name. He knew her full name. "Yes." The man reached into his briefcase with movements sharp and efficient. "My name is Richard Ashford. I'm the senior partner at Ashford, Chun and Associates, and the executor of the estate of Harrison James Montgomery." He paused, watching her face for recognition. When he found none, just confusion and rising panic, he continued. "Mr. Montgomery passed away peacefully in his sleep last night at 11:47 p.m. His final will and testament, executed and notarized 6 months ago, contains a specific provision that requires your immediate presence for the reading of his estate distribution. The world tilted. Madison grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself, the coffee pot nearly slipping from her grip. I don't understand. Who was Harrison Montgomery? Richard's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes softened by a fraction. Table 7, he said quietly. The gentleman who arrived every morning at 6:47. Black coffee, 2 sugars, no cream. Wheat toast cut diagonally, butter served on the side in a small ramekin. 42 minutes corner booth facing the window. The specificity hit Madison like a physical blow. Her breath caught. How do you know? Because Mr. Montgomery documented everything, Miss Cole. Every detail. Every morning. Richard pulled the document from his briefcase, flipped it open. Month 2. She brought a space heater without being asked. Positioned it at an angle so the warmth would reach me without drawing attention. She understood instinctively that dignity matters more than obvious charity. Madison's eyes burned with sudden tears. Month 5. She gave me her flannel shirt. Not new but warm. She framed it as taking up space in her locker, preserving my pride even in the act of giving. She sees people, not problems. Richard looked up from a document. Mr. Montgomery was quite clear in his instructions, Ms. Cole. He observed you for 8 months. Watched how you treated someone you believed to be homeless, worthless, invisible. Watched how you continued showing kindness despite mockery from your colleagues. Watched how you talked to him about your dreams, community health clinics, nursing scholarships, never knowing who you were speaking to. He noticed everything, Richard said softly, and he made very specific arrangements regarding you. Behind the counter, Sandra stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. Marcus had abandoned the grill entirely, staring through the kitchen window with his spatula hanging forgotten at his side. Madison's voice came out barely above a whisper. What kind of arrangements? Richard closed the document with a soft snap that somehow felt louder than it should. That information will be disclosed at the formal reading of the will, which is scheduled to begin in 90 minutes at our downtown office. Your presence is not optional, Miss Cole. It's a legal requirement. Madison looked around the diner, at the half-full coffee cups on tables she hadn't cleared, at Sandra's shocked face, at her apron still tied around her waist with the morning's order tickets stuffed in a pocket. I'm in the middle of my shift. I can't just... Your manager has already been contacted and compensated for the inconvenience, Richard interrupted smoothly. You're officially off the clock as of this moment. Mr. Montgomery's estate will cover any lost wages, tips, or scheduling complications. One of the security men stepped forward, holding what looked like a check. He handed it to Sandra, who took it with trembling fingers. Her eyes went wide. This is for 3 months' wages. Mr. Montgomery was thorough, Richard said. Then, turning back to Madison. Ms. Cole, I understand this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand something. Harrison Montgomery was not the homeless man you believed him to be. He was one of Seattle's most successful technology entrepreneurs, with a personal net worth exceeding $500 million. And his will explicitly names you as a beneficiary. The reading cannot proceed without you. Madison felt the world spin. 500 million. The ghost had been a billionaire. Subscribe now, because what you think you know about the people around you might be the biggest lie you've ever believed. I don't. Madison's voice cracked. I barely knew him. We never even had a real conversation. That's where you're wrong, Richard said gently. You had 8 months of conversations. He just didn't respond the way you expected. But he listened to every word, Miss Cole, and he made decisions based on what he heard. The 4 security men remained by the door, patient and immovable. The entire diner watched this scene unfold like spectators at a play they didn't have tickets for. Madison untied her apron with shaking hands, folded it carefully, habits dying hard even in crisis, looked one last time at table 7, at the empty booth where a ghost had sat for 8 months, watching her, measuring her, judging her worthy of something she couldn't begin to imagine. Okay, she whispered. I'll come. Outside, parked at the curb where the old man used to catch his bus, sat a limousine. Not just any limousine. a stretched black Mercedes that looked like it cost more than Madison's entire neighborhood. The paint gleamed even under gray skies. Chrome accents caught what little light filtered through the clouds. One of the security men opened the rear door, revealing leather seats the color of cream and an interior that smelled of luxury Madison had only ever seen in movies. She climbed in on shaking legs. The door closed with a whisper of German engineering. The leather was butter soft beneath her. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. Richard sat across from her, opening his briefcase again, already absorbed in documents she couldn't read from his angle. Through the tinted window, Madison watched Rosie's diner grow smaller, watched Sandra standing on the sidewalk, still holding that check, her mouth moving in conversation with Marcus, who'd followed her outside, watched the neon sign flicker Rosie's, the S buzzing on and off like it had for years, watched Table 7 disappear from view as the limousine pulled smoothly into traffic, carrying her away from a life she'd known and to a truth she couldn't yet comprehend. The chapter closed. The next one opened, and Madison Cole sat in expensive silence, trying to remember how to breathe. The limousine glided through Seattle's rain-slick streets with the smooth indifference of something that had never known friction. Madison sat rigidly on the leather seat, her work uniform suddenly feeling like a costume from a movie about poverty. Too accurate, too visible, too emblematic of everything that separated her from the man across from her. Richard worked in silence, his fingers moving across documents with practiced efficiency. He didn't offer explanation or small talk, just the soft scratch of pen on paper, the occasional turn of a page, the muted classical music that had never stopped playing from the hidden speakers. Madison's mind spiraled. A billionaire. The old man at Table 7 had been a billionaire. She'd served him toast for 8 months while wearing shoes with holes in the soles. While he'd watched, while he'd documented, while he'd decided she was worth something. The drive took them south, away from Capitol Hill's modest neighborhoods with their cramped apartments and struggling small businesses, through the wealthy pockets of Seattle where trees grew taller and properties expanded outward like they were pushing away from something. Then across the I-90 bridge toward Mercer Island, the place Madison had only ever seen on real estate websites when she was fantasizing about impossible futures. The houses grew larger. The spaces between them grew wider. Gardens became private forests. Driveways became roads unto themselves. Richard glanced up from his documents. Mr. Montgomery's estate is in the northern section, purchased in 1985 with his wife Eleanor. They spent 40 years building it into what it became. 40 years. Madison had been alive for 26. She tried to imagine having that much time, that much security, that much permanence. The math didn't compute in her brain. The limousine turned onto a private drive bordered by mature oak trees that probably predated Seattle's founding. Through the rain, Madison caught her first glimpse of Montgomery's house. It wasn't a house. It was a statement. The mansion emerged from the rain like something painted by an artist who'd been commissioned to create the physical manifestation of generational wealth. Glass and steel and stone arranged in defiance of gravity and good taste. Modern brutalism softened by the landscape architecture that surrounded it. Water features, sculptured gardens, carefully positioned trees that had probably taken years to grow into their current positions. Madison's breath caught. The limousine pulled under a covered portico. Richard was already gathering his briefcase before the driver came around to open the door. Madison hesitated, suddenly aware of her appearance in a way she hadn't been in the car. Her uniform, her worn sneakers with the holes, the stain on her sleeve from this morning's shift, coffee that she'd never managed to scrub out. She stepped out onto imported stone, probably marble, probably cost more per square foot than her entire apartment. The portico extended into the entry hall, and beyond that, the space opened like a cathedral. Marble floors reflected light in a way that made her eyes hurt. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed views of Lake Washington, the water gray and restless under rain clouds. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings, so high they seemed to belong to a different world. Original artwork lined the walls. Paintings Madison recognized from museum visits she couldn't afford, sculptures that probably had names and provenance and Wikipedia entries. A butler appeared from somewhere. Not appeared exactly, materialized with such practiced discretion that Madison wondered if he was actually a ghost, an employee so well-trained in invisibility that he'd achieved some Zen state of professional disappearance. "Mr. Ashford," the butler said with a nod. Then his eyes flipped to Madison, catalogued her, and returned to Richard with no change in expression. "The family has assembled in the conference room, as instructed." The family. Brandon and his wife. People who belonged in this marble cathedral. People who'd never had to wonder if they could afford to finish nursing school. People who'd probably never questioned whether kindness mattered. Madison followed Richard through the space, acutely aware that her sneakers were leaving faint, wet impressions on the pristine marble. Each step felt like a violation, like she was contaminating something sacred with her presence and her poverty and her worn-out shoes. The hallways seemed to multiply. Doors opened onto rooms she couldn't process fast enough. Libraries, sitting rooms, what might have been a small ballroom. Every surface spoke of money. Not just money, but time. The kind of wealth that accumulated not through luck, but through decades of careful cultivation. She felt like a stray cat that had wandered into a palace and couldn't figure out how to leave. The conference room was lined with dark wood and dominated by a table that looked like it could seat 30. Currently, it held 4 people. Richard Ashford, now settling into a leather chair at the head. A woman in professional attire Madison assumed was another attorney. And 2 people who could only be family. Brandon Montgomery sat at the table's midpoint, drumming his fingers against the polished surface with the impatience of someone accustomed to having his time treated as valuable. His suit, some designer label Madison couldn't identify, pulled tight across his shoulders, the fabric straining as if his body had expanded beyond what the tailor anticipated. A Rolex caught the light on his wrist, the watch so shiny it looked new, worn more as a status symbol than as an actual timepiece. His wife, Clarissa, occupied the chair beside him. Pearl necklace, perfectly highlighted hair, eyes that moved across Madison with the swift judgment of someone trained in cataloging and dismissing. Her designer handbag sat on the table. Real leather, not the kind Madison could ever afford. And her nails were lacquered in a shade that probably had a luxury brand name attached. When Madison entered, Brandon's expression shifted into something between amusement and disdain. "This is who we've been waiting for," he said to no one in particular, though the comment was clearly meant for Madison's consumption. "A waitress." Clarissa let out a small, sharp laugh, the kind of laugh designed to wound. "She probably thinks she just hit the lottery," Brandon continued, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "Showed up here in what, a uniform? How much does Uncle Harrison leave a waitress? Enough for a down payment on a used Honda?" Richard's expression remained neutral, but Madison caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "We'll discuss the estate distribution now." "Finally," Brandon muttered, checking his phone with theatrical impatience. "I've got golf at 2. The attorney beside Richard opened her laptop, documents appearing on the large screen built into the wall. Legal language scrolled past, trust, provisions, conditions, stipulations. The formal apparatus of money transferring between the living and the dead. Richard cleared his throat. This will was executed 6 months ago and notarized by 3 independent witnesses. Mr. Montgomery was of sound mind and explicit in his instructions. He paused, his gaze moving between Brandon and Madison. The estate is valued at approximately $520 million, though that number fluctuates based on market conditions and the ongoing performance of certain investment portfolios. Brandon sat up straighter. $500 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. "The distribution," Richard continued, "proceeds according to the specific instructions contained in this document." He opened the first page. The room fell silent. Even Clarissa stopped checking her phone. Richard adjusted his reading glasses with the precision of someone about to deliver something momentous. "I, Harrison James Montgomery, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make, publish, and declare this to be my last will and testament." The formal language continued, standard legal preamble, instructions for debt payment, funeral wishes. Madison watched Brandon's fingers resuming their impatient drumming, watched Clarissa's eyes sharpen with anticipation, watched the other attorney taking notes with methodical precision. "First," Richard said, To my nephew, Brandon Montgomery, and his wife, Clarissa, I leave the following. Madison noticed him tense slightly. Clarissa leaned forward. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. The money, the validation of their blood relation, their years of dutiful family acknowledgement, their attendance at Thanksgiving dinners and birthday celebrations that probably cost more per plate than Madison made in a week. The family residence at 4847 Mercer Island Drive, Richard continued reading, valued at approximately $3.2 million. Additionally, a portfolio of conservative investments currently valued at $1.8 million, generating approximately $70,000 in annual dividends. Brandon's smile faltered. That's it? $2 million. Additionally, Richard said, his tone never wavering, an annual trust distribution of $150,000, provided these conditions are met. First, you maintain continuous employment at a legitimate business for no fewer than 40 hours per week. Second, you refrain from filing lawsuits against this estate or its beneficiaries. Third, you undertake at least 8 hours per month of volunteer work with a charitable organization. Should any of these conditions be violated, the trust terminates and the remaining balance reverts to the Eleanor Montgomery Foundation for Community Health. Clarissa's face had gone pale. Brandon looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. Most would consider this extremely generous, the attorney noted quietly. But Brandon wasn't listening. His eyes had locked on Richard. There's more money. There has to be. There is, Richard confirmed. But we're getting to that. He turned the page. Madison's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She had no idea what was coming, only that the old man, the billionaire, had written her into his will, had decided she was worth something, worth enough to bring here to this marble cathedral, to face the judgment of people who clearly resented her very existence. Richard looked directly at Madison. To Madison Elizabeth Cole, he read, whose kindness reminded me of everything my beloved Eleanor embodied. The formal language of the will continued, each word a small stone building toward something none of them could yet see. But Madison caught the shift in the room's energy. Brandon leaned forward, watching her now, instead of scrolling through his phone. Clarissa's expression sharpened with something between curiosity and concern. Richard continued reading. To Madison Elizabeth Cole, I leave the following monetary bequest, $250,000, to be transferred directly to her, free of any trust conditions or stipulations. Additionally, I leave to her the property currently known as Rosie's Diner, including the building and all associated fixtures, with the proviso that she may do with it as she sees fit, with no requirement to maintain its current business model or operations. Madison's breath caught. $250,000. Rosie's Diner. Freedom from debt, from the eviction notice taped to her apartment door, from the suffocating weight of being 3 weeks behind on rent. She felt tears burn in her eyes. Brandon, however, looked like he'd been struck. Wait. She gets $250,000? And property? For what? Serving him coffee. For demonstrating genuine kindness, Richard said quietly, which appears to have been the criteria Mr. Montgomery was evaluating. That's insane, Brandon spat out. You're telling me he leaves this waitress more money than most of my annual income. And I get what? $2 million for being his actual family? Richard's expression remained impassive. You received $2 million of valuable property and a trust distribution that exceeds what most Americans earn in 5 years. I would suggest that perspective is appropriate here. This is bullshit, Clarissa hissed, her pearl necklace catching the light as she leaned forward. This will needs to be challenged. This woman somehow manipulated a wealthy man into what? Richard interrupted smoothly. Into purchasing space heaters? Into teaching her how to cut toast properly? Into listening to her talk about dreams of community health clinics. He closed the document with deliberate finality. Mr. Montgomery was observing character, not being manipulated. The legal team has already confirmed that this will is ironclad. Any attempt to challenge it will result in a legal proceeding that costs you significantly more than what you've already been bequeathed. Brandon slumped back in his chair, his face the color of spoiled cream. $5 million was apparently not enough when someone else was receiving anything at all. Madison couldn't process the weight of what had just been said. $250,000. The number didn't feel real. It was the kind of money that solved problems, all of them simultaneously. No more eviction notices. No more choosing between medications and groceries. No more abandoned nursing degree. She could go back to school. She could actually finish. She could become the person she'd dreamed of becoming before life had intervened with its thousand small cruelties. Tears spilled over her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "That can't be all," Brandon said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "There's more money. There has to be. What about the tech company? What about the investment portfolios? Where's the rest of it?" Richard turned another page. "There is additional money, yes. However, the substantial bulk of the estate, approximately $400 million, has been placed into the Eleanor Montgomery Foundation for Community Health. This foundation will be dedicated to establishing free medical clinics in underserved communities across the Pacific Northwest, providing nursing scholarships for students from low-income backgrounds, and funding community health initiatives in Mr. Montgomery's late wife's name." Clarissa made a noise somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "He's giving $400 million to charity? To foundations? This is his will," Richard said. "His money, his choice." Brandon's face had gone from cream to beet red. "And us? His actual family? We get what? $5 million in a trust fund, while some stranger gets $250,000 and a diner." "You get $5 million, Richard repeated calmly. "And you get to live knowing you didn't pass his test." The words landed like a physical blow. Brandon opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For a moment, Madison thought he might actually scream. But then he slumped back in his chair, deflated. The expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume worn by an actor who'd realized he was playing a minor character in someone else's story. Clarissa reached over and gripped his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging in hard enough to leave marks. "Additionally," Richard continued, as if Brandon's outburst had been nothing more than a minor distraction, "Madison Elizabeth Cole receives the commercial property housing Rosie's diner." Brandon actually laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound that echoed against the dark wood paneling. "A diner," he said. "He leaves her a greasy spoon. That broken-down place in Capitol Hill." He looked at Madison with something approaching pity mixed with contempt. "That's probably worth, what, $200,000? At best? In a gentrifying neighborhood, sure, maybe it'll go up, but right now..." He waved his hand dismissively. "It's not even a real asset. It's a liability. Maintenance costs, health code issues, the homeless problem in that neighborhood. He's actually cursing her with a piece of garbage property." Clarissa laughed, a high, sharp sound. "A diner. My God, after everything. He leaves the Waitress a diner and $250,000 in spending money. That's almost funny." But Madison heard something different in their mockery. She heard the sound of people confronting the possibility that they'd fundamentally misunderstood the nature of wealth and value. Richard waited for their laughter to subside before continuing. "The property has a current market value of approximately $200,000, he confirmed. However, Richard paused. The silence stretched like a held breath. Even Brandon stopped laughing. "However," Richard said, his voice dropping to something more intense. "Included with the diner property is the attached commercial real estate portfolio, consisting of 12 properties across Capitol Hill and the surrounding neighborhoods, currently valued at approximately $8.5 million. The room went absolutely still. Madison's heart stopped beating. She was sure of it. Her entire cardiovascular system had simply ceased functioning. Brandon's face drained of all color. "What? 12 properties," Richard repeated, his tone absolutely clear and measured. The diner building was merely the anchor, the visible property. However, Mr. Montgomery spent the last 15 years acquiring adjacent and surrounding properties throughout Capitol Hill. He owns the entire block on which Rosie's diner sits. He owns 3 blocks adjacent to that. He owns commercial real estate across 4 major intersections. The rental income from these properties currently generates approximately $40,000 per month." Clarissa's phone fell from her hand. It hit the table with a clatter that sounded impossibly loud. $8.5 million, Brandon whispered. His voice had changed. It had become something small and frightened, like a child's voice. $8.5 million, Richard confirmed. In addition to the $250,000 in liquid assets and the building's current market value, along with the ongoing rental income currently flowing into an account established in Mr. Montgomery's name, Madison Elizabeth Cole is receiving approximately $9 million in assets, plus a passive income stream currently valued at $40,000 monthly. Richard leaned back in his chair. It wasn't a cage, it was a kingdom, and Mr. Montgomery was handing her the keys. Madison couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the fact that her life had just been rebuilt from foundation to roof in the space of 5 minutes. Brandon stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. This is impossible. This has to be challenged. This is airtight, Richard said, his voice like steel. I've had 3 independent legal teams review it. There are no grounds for challenge. Mr. Montgomery was lucid. The will was properly executed, and the instructions are unambiguous. Unless you'd like to spend several $1,000,000 on a legal challenge, you will inevitably lose. I suggest you accept the reality of the situation. What was he? Brandon asked, his voice cracking. Was she his daughter? Did he have some illegitimate child? No, Richard said. She was a waitress who cut his toast diagonally and gave him her own coat in winter. Apparently, that was enough to change everything. Richard opened another document, this one with photographs. He turned his laptop to face the room so everyone could see. Harrison James Montgomery, he began, his voice taking on a reverent tone. Born 1944 in Seattle, Washington. Graduated from the University of Washington in 1966 with a degree in computer science. Founded Montgomery Technologies in 1978, a company that pioneered early cloud computing infrastructure. Sold the company to Amazon in 2005 for $512 million. The photographs showed a younger version of the old man. In one he stood with a woman. Eleanor, presumably. She wore a nursing uniform, her face radiant with some private joy. They stood in front of Rosie's diner, and both were laughing. Harrison and Eleanor Montgomery met in 1982, Richard continued. She was a student nurse. He was working as a dishwasher at this very diner, saving money to fund his first technological venture. They married in 1985. Eleanor built a career in community health, establishing free clinics throughout the Pacific Northwest. She passed away 5 years ago from cancer. The photograph changed. It showed a middle-aged Harrison, still healthy, still alive, standing in front of a building with Eleanor's name on it. After Eleanor's death, Harrison withdrew from public life. He liquidated most of his business interests and invested his fortune into passive income streams. And then approximately 8 months ago, he began a project. He positioned himself in ordinary spaces, diners, bus stops, public libraries, to observe how ordinary people treated the invisible members of society. The photograph changed again. It was Madison. She was cutting toast in Rosie's kitchen, visible through the service window. Her face held a concentration that suggested she was thinking about someone other than herself. You passed the test you didn't know you were taking, Miss Cole, Richard said softly. And that test was worth everything. After the will reading concluded, after Brandon had stormed out of the room with Clarissa trailing behind him, after the other attorneys had gathered their documents and excused themselves, after Richard had outlined the legal mechanisms by which Madison would gain access to accounts and properties and a new life entirely, he'd handed her a single brass key. There's one more thing, he'd said. Mr. Montgomery specifically requested that you visit his private study. He left instructions that no one else was to enter the space. The key opens a door on the second floor, east wing. Take as much time as you need. The mansion had seemed even larger on the second floor. Hallways stretched endlessly. Doors multiplied like the architecture had been designed by someone operating on dream logic. Madison found the study at the end of a corridor lined with contemporary art that probably cost more than her old car. The key turned smoothly. The door opened inward. Inside, the world changed. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covered every wall except the ones holding windows. Those windows framed Lake Washington, the rain-soaked landscape stretching toward infinity. A mahogany desk dominated the room center, its surface bare except for a single envelope with her name written in careful, deliberate handwriting. Leather chairs faced each other across a small table. A fireplace, currently cold, promised warmth on nights when the world outside turned hostile. It felt sacred, a space that belonged only to Harrison Montgomery and now, temporarily, to Madison. She closed the door behind her and just stood there, breathing in the smell of old books and furniture polish and something indefinably elegant, the perfume of a life lived thoughtfully. But the study wasn't finished, revealing its secrets. Madison moved deeper into the space and found the corkboard. It covered one entire wall, hidden partially behind a Japanese folding screen that she hadn't immediately noticed. When she moved the screen aside, she stopped breathing. The board was a landscape of observation. Timelines traced in different colored string. Photographs pinned at various points along the timeline. Notes in Montgomery's precise handwriting. Not random, not surveillance, but documentation. Careful, meticulous documentation of 8 months. Madison stepped closer and recognized herself. There was a photo of her on a Tuesday morning, her face blurred but identifiable, as she positioned the space heater. Another of her handing him coffee, her expression concentrated on the simple act of care. Another of her talking to him while wiping the adjacent table, her mouth moving in the middle of some observation about her life. But they weren't invasive. Nothing felt violated. These weren't spy photos taken from shadows. They were observation photos, the kind someone took when they wanted to document how another person moved through the world when they thought no one was watching. A corkboard covered in files and folders. Madison opened one gently. Madison Cole, week 1 observation. Offered greeting despite customer rejection. Maintained professionalism. No expectation of reciprocation. Note, she's training herself to expect nothing. Another file. Month 2. Still kind despite coworker mockery. Brought space heater without being asked. Positioned it at an angle to preserve dignity. Note, she understands that pride matters more than comfort. Another. Month 5. Gave her own coat. Framed as taking up space in her locker to protect his dignity. Note, she sees people, not problems. This is Eleanor's greatest gift. This is what Eleanor would have done. The photographs multiplied. Madison recognizing her own face at different moments across 8 months. Her hair darker in the early winter shots, lighter as spring approached. Her uniform shifting from visible where to completely worn through. But her expression remained constant. Focused on service, on noticing, on care. And in the margins, in the careful handwriting of a man observing humanity from the bottom of it, were notes that traced Madison's unspoken dreams. She talks about nursing school. Her mother wanted it. She wanted it. Life intervened. She dreams of community health clinics. She speaks as if it's someone else's dream, not her own. But I hear the longing underneath. She mentions scholarship programs for kids like her. Like Eleanor, she doesn't believe she deserves happiness, but she wants it for others. This is the kindest thing I've witnessed. Madison's hands were shaking as she turned away from the corkboard. She moved to another section of the wall, where photographs hung in a careful arrangement. Older photographs. Images of a younger Montgomery with a woman in a nursing uniform. Eleanor. The photograph showed her in 1982. Standing in front of Rosie's diner in that same uniform, but younger, radiant with possibility. She had kind eyes, the kind of eyes that saw people as they actually were, not as society had decided they were worth. In another photograph, Eleanor stood in front of a building with her name on it, a free clinic. You could see it in her posture, pride mixed with purpose. The third photograph was Eleanor's memorial, a plaque. Community Health Initiative established in honor of Eleanor Montgomery, 1985 to 2020. Madison understood then. The realization hit her with the force of something breaking open. She wasn't a stranger to Montgomery. She was a mirror, not physical. She didn't look like Eleanor, though something in the positioning of her eyes might have been familiar. No, she was a mirror of character, of the choices Eleanor had made every single day, of the way Eleanor had looked at the world and seen people worth saving. Madison had reminded Harrison Montgomery of his wife, not as a replacement, not as a substitute, but as confirmation that what Eleanor had been, that capacity for care, that ability to notice the invisible, wasn't unique to her. It wasn't lost with her death. It existed in a 26-year-old waitress, serving toast to ghosts in a diner in Seattle. Eleanor had taught Harrison how to see, and then Madison had made him see her all over again. Madison found the envelope on the desk, her name written in Harrison's careful handwriting. To Madison. She sat in one of the leather chairs and opened it slowly. The paper inside was thick, expensive, the kind that felt substantial in a world of digital communication. The letter was short. Dear Madison, you passed a test you didn't know you were taking. That test wasn't about qualifications or achievements or any of the metrics the world uses to judge worth. It was about character, about the choice to be kind when no one is watching, to offer dignity to those society has decided to ignore, to speak your dreams aloud even when they seem impossible. The money I've given you is for your freedom. Freedom from debt, from fear, from the cruel mathematics of survival. That is the first part of your inheritance. The diner and the properties are for your heart. They are Eleanor's legacy, made tangible. She built clinics to heal people's bodies. You will have the resources to continue that work. That is the second part of your inheritance. But the greatest inheritance I can leave you is this. Never forget that you reminded me my wife was right. That kindness matters. That attention matters. That seeing people, truly seeing them, is the most radical act available to us. Go back to school. Finish your nursing degree. Open those clinics you dream about. But don't do it from obligation. Do it because it matters to you. You have the freedom now. Use it well. With gratitude, Harrison James Montgomery. Madison held the letter against her chest and wept. The apartment door opened onto a space that had never felt like home, only like a place Madison slept between shifts. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbors' arguments, their televisions, the basic soundtrack of struggling lives stacked on top of each other like sardines in a can. She closed the door and sat on the floor, not on the bed, not on the chair, but directly on the worn carpet that had probably been installed sometime in the 1990s. She sat there in her work uniform, her shoes still on, her hands shaking as if her body understood something her mind hadn't yet processed. $9 million. The money had already begun transferring. Richard had set up accounts. Madison had been given access codes and online platforms and documents that explained compound interest and passive income in language that still felt foreign, like reading instructions in a language she'd studied once and forgotten. She pulled out her phone and called her mother. Her mother answered on the second ring, as she always did, her voice carrying that note of anxiety that had become a permanent fixture. Madison, is everything okay? You never called during your shift. Madison couldn't find words. She tried. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. And then something broke inside her, not in a violent way, but like ice thawing in spring, like something frozen finally releasing. She sobbed. Not pretty crying, not controlled grief. Ugly, gasping, 8 months of tension finally breaking crying. Madison? Honey? What happened? I'm coming home, Madison managed between gasps. I'm paying off everything. Your medical bills, the house, all of it. Mom, I'm finishing nursing school. I can actually finish. Silence on the other end of the line. Then her mother's voice cracking. What are you talking about? Madison explained, haltingly, incoherently. She told the story of the old man and the billionaire and the will and the $9 million. Her mother kept saying that's not possible, and are you sure this is real? And Madison kept crying because it was real, it was actually real. And for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't afraid. That night, Madison slept for 11 hours. No nightmares about eviction notices. No anxiety about rent. No calculations about which bill to pay first. Just sleep deep, dreamless. The sleep of someone who'd finally been allowed to stop running. When she woke up, the world looked different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the weight she'd been carrying had been set down. She could breathe, actually breathe, without panic sitting on her chest like a predator. 3 weeks later, Madison walked into Rosie's diner not as an employee, but as owner. She'd waited 3 weeks deliberately. She'd needed time to process, to understand the weight of what she now owned, to figure out who she wanted to be in this new life. Richard had provided all the documentation. The deed was in her name. The business was hers. The decision about what to do with it belonged entirely to her. Sarah was working the morning shift. She looked up from the register and literally dropped the coffee pot she'd been holding. The glass shattered across the floor. Neither of them moved to clean it up. Madison? Sarah's voice had gone thin and uncertain. What are you doing here? You're not on the schedule. I know, Madison said quietly. She walked to the center of the diner, looking around at the familiar space, the cracked vinyl booths, the humming refrigerator, the worn linoleum floor with its thousand small stains and stories. I need to tell you something. Marcus appeared from the kitchen, drawn by the sound of breaking glass. His face went pale when he saw Madison standing there in professional clothes. Actual clothes, not the standard work uniform. Sit down, Madison said gently. Both of you, please. They did cautiously, in the booth nearest the counter. This was wrong. The power dynamic was inverted. Employees didn't tell bosses to sit down. Servers didn't call shots. I'm not working here anymore, Madison began, and she watched their faces crumple. But not because I'm leaving, because I'm staying. I'm staying as owner. The silence that followed stretched like taffy being pulled. What? Sarah finally managed. Madison explained about the old man, about Harrison Montgomery, about the will and the inheritance and the fact that Sarah and Marcus in this diner were part of that inheritance now. So I own Rosie's, Marcus said slowly, like he was testing the words for weight and meaning. You own Rosie's? Sarah repeated, her voice rising in pitch. Madison nodded. And I need to know something. Are you both still here? Or are you leaving? She watched the calculation happen behind their eyes. The assumption that she'd fire them, replace them, turn Rosie's into something corporate and soulless. The fear mixed with the possibility that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. What's the catch? Marcus asked, his voice suspicious. You bought us out? We're gone. No catch, Madison said simply. You're both staying. Same wages, actually better wages. I'll need your help. I'll be starting nursing school again. So I can't be here every day. I need people who know this place, who care about it. People I trust. Sarah's eyes had gone red. You're not going to change it? Make it fancy? Get rid of the regulars. I'm going to change some things, Madison said carefully, but not the soul of it, not what made it matter to people. Harrison Montgomery left me this place because it mattered to him, because it represented something about human connection that money can't usually buy. I want to honor that. The confrontation came during the first real breakfast rush after Madison officially took over. Marcus cornered her by the walk-in freezer, his expression somewhere between angry and afraid. So what's the plan? Am I being demoted? Is Sarah getting your old job? I'm back to line cook? It was the question Madison had been waiting for. She understood what he was really asking. Am I safe? Do I matter? Or am I expendable now? Madison took a breath and answered honestly. I don't know how to run a restaurant business, she said. I know how to serve people and work hard and notice when someone needs help. I don't know accounting or supply chains or how to manage a kitchen. You do. Sarah does. You both know things I need to learn. She paused. So no, you're not being demoted. I'm asking you to help me not destroy this place. I need your expertise. I need your help. Not as a boss who's going to tell you what to do. As a partner who knows less about this than you do. Marcus stood there, his jaw clenching. Then finally he nodded. Okay. But if you try to turn this into some fancy gastropub. I'm not, Madison interrupted gently. I promise. The real test came 3 days later. One of the ancient dishwashing machines died mid-shift. Complete failure. Water everywhere. No way to clean plates. A breakfast rush still incoming. The old Madison would have panicked. Would have apologized profusely, asked for guidance. Expected someone else to know what to do. The new Madison called the repair company immediately. Told them it was an emergency. Then she rolled up her sleeves, grabbed a towel, and started hand-washing dishes in the industrial sink. Marcus watched from the grill. Sarah paused mid-order. Then Marcus came over without being asked and started drying. Sarah got the other dishwashers and started stacking. When the repair technician arrived an hour later, Madison was still washing dishes. Her arms were in soapy water up to her elbows. But the plates were clean. The orders were flowing. The diner was still functioning because she'd chosen to work instead of panic. The technician fixed the machine in 40 minutes. As he was packing up, he said, You the owner? Yeah, Madison confirmed. Good owner, he said. Most people panic when this happens. You just worked. After he left, Marcus came up to her. He didn't say anything, just nodded. That nod contained everything. The respect, the acknowledgement, the understanding that Madison hadn't just inherited a business. She'd earned the right to lead it by choosing to serve. 3 months after inheriting, Madison received the lawsuit papers. Brandon Montgomery, represented by an aggressive law firm with a reputation for destroying reputations, was challenging the will. The grounds were predictable: undue influence, diminished mental capacity, fraud. The media narrative was already being constructed. Local news ran stories about the mysterious waitress who'd supposedly charmed a billionaire into giving her $9 million. Social media filled with speculation, accusations, judgment. Gold digger, manipulator, seductress. Every slur people could imagine, applied without evidence or hesitation. Brandon gave interviews. He spoke about his beloved uncle being taken advantage of by a predatory employee. He presented a version of reality where Harrison Montgomery had been confused, lonely, desperate for companionship, and Madison had exploited that weakness. The lawsuit demanded that the will be invalidated, that all assets revert to Brandon, that Madison be held liable for damages due to fraudulent inducement. Richard had assured her that the case was unwinnable. The documentation was airtight. But that didn't stop the process. The legal machinery ground forward. Depositions, discovery, endless paperwork. The threat hanging over her head that this could drag on for years, that the foundation's work could be stalled, that the narrative of Gold Digger might stick in people's minds despite its falsity. Madison wanted to fight dirty. She wanted to countersue. She wanted to destroy Brandon the way he was trying to destroy her. But then she read Harrison's letter again. Use it well. She recognized that the path of kindness and truth, though harder and slower, was the only one that honored his memory. The public hearing was held in the grand ballroom of Seattle's Convention Center. Richard had suggested this format, not a courtroom, but a public forum where the evidence could be presented to an audience of Seattle's business and philanthropic community. The people who'd known Harrison, the people who understood his character. Madison walked in wearing a simple gray suit, professional but not corporate, expensive but not ostentatious. She was terrified, but she'd learned something from Harrison's example. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to move forward anyway. Brandon sat at the opposite table, flanked by attorneys in suits so dark they looked almost black. His expression radiated confidence. He'd built this narrative well. The jilted nephew, the older man with depression and isolation, the predatory young woman who saw opportunity. The moderator opened the floor. Brandon's attorney went first, painting a portrait of a declining Harrison Montgomery, a lonely man desperate for connection, a woman who'd recognized that desperation and exploited it systematically. Then it was Madison's turn. She stood. She didn't use notes. She didn't read from prepared statements. 8 months, she said, her voice steady. That's how long I knew Harrison Montgomery. Every morning at 6:47 a.m., he came to the diner where I worked. He ordered black coffee with 2 sugars, wheat toast cut diagonally, butter on the side. He sat for 42 minutes and looked out the window. She paused. For the first 3 weeks, he didn't acknowledge me. For months after that, he barely spoke. But he was watching, observing, testing, and I had no idea. Madison told the story simply. The space heater, the flannel shirt, the conversations about her dreams. She didn't embellish. She didn't manipulate the narrative. Just truth. I was serving someone I thought was homeless, she continued. Someone invisible to everyone else. I wasn't trying to be kind for reward. I was being kind because that's who I am. Because my mother taught me to see people. Because I believed kindness mattered even when no one was watching. She pulled out Harrison's letters, his observations, his photographs documenting her work, his notes about Eleanor, about what Eleanor would have wanted. Here are his own words, Madison said, holding up the documentation. Not my interpretation. His words, his observations, his clear, coherent, documented decision. This man was not confused. He was not taken advantage of. He was testing character. And he left me his legacy because he believed I understood what Eleanor believed, that people matter, that kindness matters. Then she turned to address Brandon directly. You're angry because your uncle didn't give you money, Madison said quietly. But he did. $5 million. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. But that wasn't enough. You wanted everything. And when you couldn't have everything, you decided to destroy the thing your uncle loved, the thing he believed in. She presented the documentation of Brandon's financial failures, his debts, his business ventures that had collapsed, the ways he'd asked Harrison for money multiple times and been refused. Your uncle left conditional trust money, Madison continued, not because he hated you, but because he wanted you to build something, to become someone, to contribute instead of just consume. He was trying to save you, and instead of accepting that gift, you're trying to destroy the legacy he actually cared about. Madison's voice didn't waver. The Eleanor Montgomery Foundation will open the first free clinic in Capitol Hill next month. It will serve people who can't afford healthcare. It will offer nursing scholarships to students who can't afford school. It will honor both Eleanor and Harrison's belief that people matter. And that work will continue regardless of what you do here today. The room had gone completely silent. Then the oldest member of the board, a woman in her 80s who'd known Eleanor in the 1980s, stood up and began to applaud. After a moment, others joined. The applause grew until it filled the entire ballroom. Not everyone. Brandon's legal team remained silent, but enough to make clear which version of the truth Seattle believed. Brandon left the hearing before it officially concluded. The lawsuit was quietly withdrawn 3 weeks later. The narrative shifted. The press reported on the Eleanor Montgomery Foundation instead of Madison's supposed crimes. The story became what it had always actually been: a billionaire's final act of recognizing goodness and deciding to amplify it. 1 year later, the transformation was complete. Rosie's Diner had been renovated, but the soul remained. The same worn booths, but now with comfortable padding. The same basic menu, now with more diverse options and a commitment to sourcing from local farms. A small memorial plaque hung near Table 7. Harrison and Eleanor Montgomery, in recognition of kindness observed and honored. Sarah now managed the front of house as general manager, her steady presence and institutional knowledge invaluable. Marcus had become head chef, and he'd elevated the menu while keeping the heart of what Rosie's was. The staff had doubled. They paid better wages. They offered health insurance. They'd become a model of what a business could be when profit wasn't the only measure of success. Madison had started nursing school in September. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was taking evening classes while running a business and laying the groundwork for the Eleanor Montgomery Foundation. She was exhausted in ways she'd never been before. But it was a different exhaustion. This one came with meaning. This one built toward something. The Eleanor Montgomery Foundation had opened its first free clinic in Capitol Hill in October. Staffed by volunteer nurses and doctors, it served the underinsured and uninsured population that had been Madison's neighbors. It offered basic health care, preventive services, and health education. Within 6 months, it had served over 3,000 patients. The foundation's board included Richard Ashford, Sarah, Marcus, and, surprisingly, Brandon Montgomery. He'd approached Madison 3 months after the hearing concluded. His face had been red, his posture defensive. But something in his eyes had shifted. "I'm sorry," he'd said quietly, "for everything, for the lawsuit, for the media campaign, for not understanding what my uncle was actually trying to teach me." Madison had studied him for a long moment. Then she'd said something Harrison would have said. "Would you like to help?" Brandon now spent 2 days a week at the foundation's board meetings. He'd liquidated some of his investments and donated significantly to the clinic's expansion. He wasn't transformed into someone entirely different. Transformation doesn't work that quickly. But he was trying. He was learning. He was beginning to understand that his uncle's greatest gift wasn't money. It was an example of what a life built on recognizing and honoring others could become. Madison's apartment had changed. It was no longer just a place to sleep between shifts. She'd moved into a small house near the university, closer to campus, with space for a study and a garden she was learning to tend. Her mother had paid off her house with some of the money Madison had gifted her. They had dinner together every Sunday now, a ritual they were building, one meal at a time. Table 7 remained empty most mornings. Madison kept it that way deliberately. It was a memorial, a reminder. Every morning at 6:47 a.m., when Madison was there, she'd look at that booth and remember. Remember kindness observed. Remember that the invisible people in our lives might be watching. Remember that what we think is invisible might matter more than we ever know. The greatest investments we make aren't in stocks or real estate or the accumulation of things. They're in each other. They're in the moments when we choose to see someone who's invisible. When we choose to be kind without expecting reward. When we choose to believe that people matter more than profit. A simple act of kindness, cutting toast diagonally, positioning a space heater, giving away your own coat, can ripple outward in ways we can never predict. It can change a life. It can inspire a foundation. It can teach someone that they were right to believe kindness mattered, even after 8 months of silence had made them wonder if anyone was paying attention. So here's the question for you. Who are the invisible people in your own life? The ones you pass every day without really seeing. The ones society has decided don't matter enough to notice. Do you have the grace to see them? Do you have the courage to be kind without knowing if anyone will ever know about it? Like this story, if it reminded you that kindness matters. Comment and tell us. What would you have done in Madison's place? Subscribe so you don't miss more stories about the hidden ways goodness moves through the world. Share this with someone who needs to remember that they might be being watched, that their kindness might be observed and honored in ways they can't yet imagine. Because the truth is this, we're all being tested. Every single day, we're all being observed by someone, not necessarily by billionaires in disguise, but by our communities, our families, our futures. The question isn't whether we're being watched. The question is whether we're the kind of person worth watching.